Hey guys, great to see you here. And as you can tell from the flashy costume, we're here to celebrate Pride Month. To be honest, I don't think I've ever been super open about celebrating Pride Month. I notice I'm part of the LGBTQ+ community, but I wasn't too public about it until recently. To those who don't know, I'm somewhere on both the gay spectrum and the ace spectrum, but I can't say for sure. I might be homosexual and aromantic, or maybe I'm asexual and homoromantic, or maybe I'm just gay and my strong choice to not pursue relationships or intimacy is a personal thing. But let's just keep things simple. I'm gay and ace. Now something else you might not know about me is that over the last, 9 months, I've developed a completely uncontrollable support for well-written same-sex couples in media. It's kind of funny, because I've never really been a fan of romance and stories. I don't know if this hyperfixation came about because of my lesbian sister, or just because of the things I'm reading and watching, but either way, I'm pretty invested in gay couples now. That's why I drew Lumity fan art for Valentine's Day, that's part of why I was so fixated on the webcomic Castle Swimmer, the other part being the presence of Fish Boys. And as you can tell from the video title, that's how I got into Heartstopper. So I think I'll start with a bit of history on this graphic novel. Heartstopper was written by an English author and artist named Alice Oseman. She started writing books in 2014, releasing her debut novel Solitaire at the age of 19. And here's a fun fact, the main protagonists of Heartstopper were first seen as side characters in Solitaire. Not to mention, the concept of Heartstopper dates back to Oseman drawing it in her sketchbook during her sixth form years, which to any non-British people are the last 2 years of compulsory school, from age 16 to 18. Heartstopper as we know it was first launched as a webcomic in 2016, and was later serialised in graphic novel form, with the first volume being published 2 years later. And what's really cool is that it had a Kickstarter campaign to crowdfund the book's publishing. Heartstopper was the first book I ever saw to be supported this way, and I really like this. It gives the vibe of a small artist on the internet finally getting to succeed in showing their content out to the world, and that makes her work really relatable to me, which honestly plays a big part in my enjoyment and interest of this book. Also, this is a bit of a side note, but I want to share Alice's autobiography at the end of the book, just because it's a mood and I relate to it. Right now, the series is up to Volume 4, with Volume 5 being set for release in November this year, along with a spin-off called the Heartstopper Yearbook, which just has the cutest cover. The series has also been adapted into a live-action Netflix show, which as I learned while scripting this video, Oseman actually worked on as a writer and producer. But just to clarify, this video is specifically about the book series, of which I've only read Volume 1. Speaking of which, how did I find Heartstopper in the first place? Well, something you should know about me is that I work at a library. Kind of. But I didn't want to get too deep into my work life. So at some point several months ago, probably near the start of this year, I was doing my job putting books back on the shelves when I stumbled across a copy of Heartstopper, the first volume specifically. And the moment I saw the tagline "Boy Meets Boy," I was all in. But in classic Mirror fashion, I didn't actually get the book, and I just kept it to myself for months. So when May came around, I finally brought up Heartstopper to my mum so she could order it off the internet. I could have ordered it myself, but I have a mental block around spending money online, and also she has Amazon Prime so she gets free delivery. I decided to go through with the order around the middle of May, since I'd already decided that this was the perfect opportunity to make a Pride Month video. It ended up arriving really early, and then the next morning I proceeded to finish the whole book in an hour before work. And now here I am, talking about this book to however many people see this video. So what made me love this book as much as I do? Let's start with the story. Which, side note, while I will be going over a lot of character beats, I'll try not to spoil too many of the actual story events. But either way, let's go. Heartstopper begins in an all-boys grammar school, with one of our main characters, Charlie Spring, who's been outed as gay by the other kids and not treated the best for it. And the first we see of him is in the school library, where he's there in secret with Ben Hope, his boyfriend. And I say that loosely because it doesn't take long to figure out that Charlie's on the receiving end of an unhealthier relationship. But let's put that to the side for now, we'll get back to it later. So everyone's back from Christmas break and the school's got this new form group system. Charlie walks into the form group and he's told that he's sharing a desk with this older boy named Nicholas Nelson, our other main character. And as the story goes on, we get to see more of Charlie and Nick at the school, though at first Charlie's not so sure about Nick. That's partly because of the other kids' preconceived notions, because he's on the rugby team and people think he's a chav, or at the very least they think he's the straightest of straight guys. But the other half is just Charlie's personal insecurities because he's overthinking what little stuff they say to each other. I can relate. But before long, we get to learn that Nick's basically just a big precious softie. He even convinces Charlie to join the rugby team, and then they come around to each other's houses, and Nick slowly comes to terms with the fact that he's gay too. No, I think I'll leave it at that. There is some other stuff that happens in the story, of course, ranging from skeptical friends to Ben Hope's complete lack of respect for Charlie, but I don't want to give too many spoilers. So let's start with the obvious. I loved Heartstopper. I think that speaks for itself given how quickly I finished it. But that's the magic of graphic novels, especially the kind where the story is mostly told through pictures. Visual storytelling makes it that bit faster to finish. I will admit that I don't read purely romance or purely real slice of life stories that often. Based on the content I make, you can probably tell that I'm mostly a fantasy kind of guy. But I was very quickly attached to the world of Heartstopper, particularly because of the story and characters. Most notably, of course, Charlie and Nick and their whole relationship. Speaking personally, I'm only really drawn to relationships where the partners feel like equals, and above all, like friends. And not to stereotype, but I feel like same-sex couples tend to fit this criteria more often than straight couples. If only because straight romance can sometimes fall into more old-fashioned tropes, let's say. Suffice to say, Nick and Charlie really succeeded for me, both as a couple but especially as friends. Well, they don't properly get together until the end of the book, so friends is the focus throughout regardless, but my point still stands. So from first impressions just looking at them, it's clear that they've got some pretty opposite traits. Like, we've got Nick, who's the rugby player, a very typically physical character, seems reasonably self-confident. Meanwhile, Charlie's much more nerdy with interests like video games and playing the drums, and definitely seems to overthink and sweat the little details. But as the story goes on, it's clear that they're pretty similar in regards to the fact that they're just the sweetest, most precious cinnamon rolls who genuinely value the friendship they build. I also love how their differences complement each other, especially with the way they handle problems. Since Nick's quite straight to the point, while Charlie's very much an overthinker who doesn't like to open up. And then as the story goes on, Nick helps Charlie to open up regarding the whole Ben problem, and that all pays off near the end where he stands up for himself. Actually, that leads to a bit of a side tangent, because I really relate to Charlie Spring. Like, overthinking about relationships that he thinks are bad but are actually completely fine. Not opening up about his problems and then proceeding to info dump them all at once when he genuinely trusts them with someone. That's literally me. I actually headcanon Charlie as neurodivergent because of that, which is probably my own way of projecting, being neurodivergent myself, but yeah. That's what I say about books. It's all a personal experience and about how you connect to the characters personally. Granted, that applies more to purely text stories than it does to graphic novels, but I think they're similar enough in that regard. So getting back on topic, one major theme in this story that I caught on to quickly was the whole idea of what makes a healthy relationship? And I especially felt that with the contrast in Charlie and Nick's relationship versus Charlie and Ben. Like I said, it was pretty clear to me from the start that Ben Hope was an abuser, and especially a bit later on, he really gives off red flags. Chief among them being the spam text where he calls Charlie useless and strings together profanity to pressure him into doing stuff that's clearly against school rules, even after Charlie makes it clear that he really doesn't want to. And then he makes him do it anyway? Without getting into too many details, Ben doesn't like or respect Charlie. He doesn't respect his consent. He treats him like an item. That's not okay. That's harassment. That's literally emotional abuse, you But while Ben has no consent with Charlie, Nick is the opposite. Nick asks Charlie if he wants to join the rugby team. Charlie shows interest in Nick's dog, and Nick asks Charlie if he's free on Saturday to come round to his house. They never make their friend do anything he doesn't want to do. They respect each other's boundaries. And that's the main takeaway from Nick and Charlie. Friendship, and by extension relationships, are built upon trust between each other. That's something I really stand by with friendships in general, most of which are on the internet, let's be real. So I think that definitely helped me recognise and appreciate this theme in the story. And of course, because it's Pride Month, I can't talk about Heartstopper without bringing up the gay rep. I mean, the whole focus of the story is the relationship between Nick and Charlie, and Nick in particular coming to terms with the fact that he's into boys too. And that's perfectly okay! Not to say that people in the story are quite as chill with this. It's pretty clear that when Charlie first came out, people weren't exactly the nicest to him. But the people are shown to have gotten over that by the time the story starts, and save for a couple of genuinely nasty people, most of the school seems pretty chill with people being gay, which is great! While I always love to see media where queer and neurodivergent characters are treated as completely normal, this book goes to show that a more grounded, I guess less hopeful take can still work well and play to the story's benefit. Also, shout out to the PE teacher who calls these kids out for assuming that Nick's straight. That's another thing I stand by. People are more than just preconceived stereotypes. There's no rule that every big beefy rugby bro has to be straight, and there's no rule that every short-haired punk rocker chick has to be a lesbian. I mean, I guess I do conform to ace stereotypes, but I can't help it, okay? Dragons are just really cool. Sorry, I'm really good at getting distracted. I think I've said everything I want to say about the actual story of Heartstopper, but since this is a graphic novel, another big appeal for this book is the art style and presentation. The character designs are memorable and clearly distinct from one another, which is especially good to ensure in a black and white comic. The art style is simple and charming in a way that really works to the book's advantage, and on the whole it kind of gives me secondary school art kid sketchbook vibes. I think that especially shows with the way the speech bubbles and text are drawn. It's also really cute how she put these little smiley faces and character expressions in some of the speech bubbles. It definitely helps sell the emotion more. On the whole, this book's really good at delivering cute and happy vibes with the art, but I think it also does really well with the much darker emotions. There's one effect that's used quite a bit where the rims of the panels kind of dissolve. I really like how it's used to show characters slipping in and out of deep thoughts. In a similar light, I also think that this broken, jaggedy panel look that's used for certain scenes with Ben really helps deliver the bad feeling of those scenes. By the way, if you like Alice Oseman's art style, she actually has an Instagram account where she posts this kind of art in full colour. I'll leave a link on screen and in the description. I think I've finished gushing about this book for now though, so how about we talk a bit about the art I'm drawing? Because oh boy, this was a process for sure. I spent 7 hours on this piece, which is pretty average by this channel standards, but a full 4 hours of that time went into the sketching. That's partially because this was a pretty difficult pose to get right, but the real reason why it took so long was because I had a lot of second guessing. You see, I had a pretty strong idea of what I wanted this art to be from the start, just Charlie and Nick hugging it out. And this is something I don't normally draw. In fact, characters being really close to each other is something I've only drawn once or twice. And aside from the Lumity redraw for Valentine's Day, which is more of an action scene with a spice of romance, I've really never drawn anything romantic before. But hey, I'm willing to improve as an artist, and one way to do that is by pushing past my comfort zone and expanding my horizons. Let's just say there was a lot to push past. For starters, something I found a bit difficult towards the beginning would be the proportions. Something that really hit me as I was drawing this was that Alice Oseman draws her characters very tall. Looking at this panel, I made a rough estimation of 8 heads tall, whereas my art style has much bigger heads, and thus the characters appear to be a lot shorter. Also, because I'm not good at drawing heads from the side, I ended up making the boys' heads even bigger, making them look even smaller. Charlie looked like he was, 11 or 12? I thought this was a wake-up call that I was making my early teen characters too childlike, but I did later realise that it's because I made the heads even bigger than I normally do. I think in future I need to double check the size of my heads whenever I do a side-on view, but in the end, I decided to keep to the shorter proportions, just because I think it's cute, and I found it kind of fun making such a contrast to the art style in the comic. But aside from the proportions, the pose. The pose itself was the real struggle here. As usual, I prepared for this video in advance by drawing some concept sketches in my personal sketchbook, just by looking up gay anime boys hugging and translating those snuggles onto paper. I was considering making this video a kind of multi-art speed paint, where I draw these 3 simpler waist-up pieces, but after how much I struggled with the first pose, I hit a bit of a rut to be honest. I mostly didn't like how Nick's face was totally obscured, so I ended up switching references and finding a new pose, which while it still covered a lot of Nick's face, at least let us see half of it, plus it had a much more interesting perspective. This was also when I got a strong idea for the composition, fitting the text from the blurb of the book at the top of the art. As for the characters themselves, there was definitely a bit of a struggle when drawing their hair. More so with Nick's hair, that really stumped me at first, but I was able to figure it all out. I've mentioned in previous videos that I'm not well versed in drawing a good variety of male hair, so I mostly just give all of my boys spiky anime hair. And while I definitely think I anime-fied these boys, it was good practice in drawing more varied hair all the same. Now for the colouring, I took some photos of pages from the Heartstopper yearbook that I found in a library, and used those as my colour references. Now because, of course, I took those pictures on my phone, I did need to increase the brightness and saturation to push these more into colours of my style. Then once I was done with the colours, it was on to the shading, where I decided to have a little bit of fun. You see, I've recently gotten back to reading Castle Swimmer after a months-long hiatus, and something that caught my attention was the shading. It's pretty simple cell shading, sure, but it has a bit of a rough, painterly edge to it, and seeing that made me want to try out some more painterly shading for myself. So I started with cell shading, then used a painty brush to add the shape to the edges. I ended up cycling through at least half a dozen Krita brushes trying to find the right one. After that, I added the lighting, which unlike with shading, I only apply to the edges when I'm doing full cell shading. So I took my paintbrush, went to town on Nick's hair, and that's when I realised how much I love the look of this brush. After I was done with the lighting, I went back and redid all of my shading using paintbrush strokes, and even gave the boys paintbrush blushing. Later on, I also faded out the line art a bit to complement the more painterly look. I really like how this paint shading looks. It creates a lot more visual interest than any kind of shading I've done in the past, but let me know what you guys think. I'll definitely have to come back to it in the near future. Maybe it'll even become commonplace. We'll see. The last thing to talk about here would be the background. Normally I struggle with backgrounds, but for this piece, I was heavily inspired by the cover of the graphic novel, which, to clarify, I own the hardback version of Heartstopper. It's a more recent edition and actually includes a bonus short story. I thought the teal created a good contrast to Charlie and Nick's colour schemes, helping them stand out more. I also ended up using the same paintbrush that I used for the shading to add some stripes to the background. As a finishing touch, I put some bars of light over the background, as well as the text on the top of the art, to make it look shiny, since the hardback cover has some really nice looking shiny line art. And with that, the art was complete. So how about we take a look at the finished result? So that leads us to the end of the video. If you haven't been able to tell, I love getting the chance to read Heartstopper. If you want to check it out yourself, I'd highly recommend this book. But if you're not in a good position to buy the actual graphic novel, then don't worry, it's available as a webcomic on Tappers too. I'm definitely going to be reading the rest of Heartstopper in the future, and maybe I'll check out more of Alice's books. I'm actually quite interested in Loveless, which is a story about asexuality, so I may pick that one up somewhere along the road. Maybe I'll even make a video on it, who knows? I really want to make more videos about books. They're an underrated medium that deserve as much justice as games and series. So if that interests you, why not subscribe? I also make plenty of fan art speed paints for games, of course, and I'm currently in the midst of a major Pokemon phase. I'd say Pokemon design videos make up the most of my content on this channel. But I'm invested in a whole lot of other fandoms beside that, probably too many to list right now. But if you're interested in my general ramblings and easy access to my art, then go follow me on Twitter and Instagram. But that should wrap up this whole video. As a closing statement, I just want to give one final thank you to Alice Oseman. If you're watching this, thank you so much for letting me experience this wonderful story. Stay confident in yourself, take pride in what makes you unique, and happy Pride Month everyone! I'll see you all next time.